The concept for Shortlist Media really came from when I was working together with my business partner, Tim Ewington, and we'd set up a small consultancy called Crash Test Media, and we were kind of using it as the opportunity as well to just incubate new ideas. And we were looking at the men's market, we were looking at why the men's magazine market was in such decline, and we kind of asked ourselves, well, is the reason it's in decline because men have fallen out of love with magazines, or is it because the magazines that are for sale for them just aren't meeting their needs anymore? And our hypothesis absolutely was the second one. So we started to do creative development on a magazine that we felt that men who were in their 20s and 30s who were still, you know, had a foot in both camps. They had a career to get up for in the morning rather than a job, but they still wanted to acquire things and have fun. They had their freedom years, I guess. So we created lots of prototype loops, and we were very interested in the free model. And so we started to develop a business model based around the idea of large-scale, high-quality, free publications, and that really was the starting point. Even though the men's market was in really significant decline, we felt that it was that way because it was super serving a younger, more down-market audience. We knew from working in that marketplace, we knew from focus groups that we ran, that that the magazines that were there were really ignoring this kind of much more valuable, more mainstream, more grown-up marketplace, full of, you know, there were guys out there who weren't buying men's magazines because they were afraid of what men's magazines were really saying about them. They were very lowest common denominator. They'd started to do very blokey things in a very blokey way. The jokes hadn't really changed. It was just a very, very tired formula. And so giving them something that they could be proud to be seen with in public, that they could identify with, that wasn't afraid to be useful and engaging and had a breadth of content, was something that that was our hypothesis really, that we felt that this would be a really winning combination editorially. The free model really was the right thing for us to launch in. What it allowed us to do was to completely reinvent the economics of consumer magazines. So we took out the very costly distribution network that exists within the paid-for sector. We're able to print the number of copies that we distribute pretty much. So we distribute about 97–98% of all the copies that we actually print, as opposed to about 60%, which is what you get in normal consumer magazines. So that makes our business model very lean and mean. And we realised that if we could offer advertisers a route to an unprecedented number of high-value consumers on a high-frequency basis, then that would really appeal to them, and that's absolutely proved to be the case. We're massively confident about the freemium model. We predicted that we would break even and be profitable in year 3 on Shortlist, and indeed we managed to achieve profitability about six months prior to the point where we originally thought. So Shortlist is now in very solid profitability. With Stylist, our second launch, we are around about 50% ahead of where we expected to be at this point, a year in, and we expect that to be profitable in its year 2. So I think we really have uncovered a very successful, sustainable, long-term business model with free. I think it's always really important when you're launching a new product onto the marketplace that you find ways to test your ideas objectively. You know, I believe in trying to make mistakes in private rather than in public, and I think the evidence when you look at most magazine development processes over the last kind of 30 or 40 years, they've mostly been developed because somebody's thought they had a great idea, they've managed to persuade a board of people to fund them, then they've launched them, and then when they've launched them, they've learned what works and what doesn't, and then you go through a very quick process of trying to reinvent it all in public. And my belief is, in actual fact, you can do it faster, more efficiently, and far more cheaply by doing lots of work before you actually launch and kind of prototype looping things. We wanted to create something which would be lean and mean and would survive during a recession. It meant that we were able to raise the money, we were able to launch, but we launched with the expectations that it was going to be a hard fight, certainly for the first year or two. So by the time it came round for a second round of funding, we delivered on what we said. So Shortlist was moving into profitability, slightly ahead of plan, and we were looking for funding for something new. This wasn't going in for second round funding because we had underfunded the first round, for example. I think when you do that, I think things become far more difficult. So we just delivered on our promises, and as a result of that, our existing investors all came back on board. We had a small funding gap, and we were able to go with a very compelling story, you know, a successful first launch, a really well-tested second launch, investors who were fully backing us. I think that's quite a compelling thing to then go and bring a new investor into. So you know, these things are never overnight. We have a very, very high degree of management control over where our copy goes. Unlike the traditional newsstand where you abrogate responsibility for this and you delegate that to the wholesale network and the retail network and you wait to find out how it did, we know at all times where every single copy is, and we know how we're doing on an hourly basis every single week, which is quite extraordinary. It's a very, very, very large scale operation. It's the kind of thing that we entirely underestimated, like anybody would when we launched the business. We kind of thought that would be a lot easier. It proved to be massively painful and caused us innumerable sleepless nights. It's the sort of thing I always think that had we known how difficult it would be, we'd never have done it in the first place. But you find yourself there and then you make it work. I spent the first 6 months every single Thursday morning being in either London or one of our other cities, just going around speaking to merchandisers, kind of zipping up the kind of top, you know, straightening down the jackets, going, no, like this, like this, like this. And we have people on the streets, compliance people on the streets every single week. You know, it's they are the way that 65% of our copies reach the marketplace. So you know, they're very important to us. The brilliant thing about being a startup is kind of people are with you, and people that work with you are very tolerant of there not necessarily being all of the kind of big company benefits and perks, and you can't pick the phone up when your computer goes wrong and ask for facilities, and you know, so we do, you know, and I'm very grateful for all the staff who crawl under desks to try and reconnect a PowerPoint and everything else. But there is only a certain amount of time, I think, that you can legitimately kind of get away with that. So we're playing catch up as a business at the moment. Just with all the really basic things. We've never had a health and safety policy, and I'm reviewing a draft of a health and safety policy at the moment, you know, where we've introduced a pension scheme, you know, a bike scheme, all the kind of trappings of a slightly bigger company. And I think it's right. It was absolutely right for us to focus on growing the company and for those things to be a bit left behind, but it's now absolutely right for us to put some of those things, you know, maternity policies, paternity policies, all that sort of thing into place, because ultimately we want to build this into a really big business. So you need to put the right foundations in there. I had an amazing time working with Felix for 18 months in New York, and he's just a kind of a whirlwind. And I think I still remember some of the things that he will kind of would kind of shout as he would come into the office. He was this incredibly larger than life kind of sun king, but he had real balls of steel. I mean, unbelievable guts and conviction and certainty. Sly Bailey was a brilliant boss. I went straight from Felix to Sly, and you know, kind of two very different people with some real similarities. Sly told me very early on when I worked with her that I had to learn to say no, and she was brilliant at that. She was brilliant at not caring what people thought of her personally and being really pragmatic about the decisions that you make. So she was very good at just saying no, and that was it. The UK is the most difficult, the most aggressive, the toughest place that you can create a new magazine in. So if you can have success as a brand in the UK, it probably means that you stand out, that you stand for something that you're unique and differentiated. It probably means that you have this hardcore that will survive export to other territories. And so I think we have two brands that I think are very distinctive. We have experience in creating this sort of business that nobody else in the world has. I mean, this wasn't, the idea of freemium magazines wasn't something that was invented in America and has been, imported into the UK. We've created it here. So we're kind of UK pioneers, UK market leaders. That's actually also true of the global stage. So we're really excited about probably finding partners we can work with in other countries, but I guess also looking at wholly owned projects out there as well. I've always found that it's very easy when you're an entrepreneur to kind of keep things to yourself, because you can kind of build this idea that everybody's up there against you. But when you deal with other entrepreneurs who have businesses that are around about the same size, you can just be completely honest and completely frank with them, and the amount that you get back from that is extraordinary. And I guess I've found over the last 3 years that I'm naturally attracted to working with other entrepreneurial businesses. So most of our closest business partnerships are with other companies that are sort of around about our size, around about our age as well, because you just find that their motives and their hunger match yours. Whereas when you're a small company, you work with a big company, you sometimes find that they really want you because you're this kind of interesting, headline story, but actually in terms of their business, you're a much smaller part of their business than they are of yours. I think the Times paywall is an interesting experiment, and it would be a foolish man that would say that Rupert Murdoch doesn't know what he's doing, because he has time and time again blazed a trail and pioneered something that people thought was crazy and too high risk and was never going to work. So far be it from me to say that it won't work. However, I think that I'm not sure that their strategy was much more than we need to stop pouring money into this service without any sign of any proper return. So I think that what they've done is they've created a service which they know that some people will pay for, but it's going to be a very small number of people, and they will therefore scale the services around the revenue that comes from that. So I think the Times website will become smaller. It will become less costly. So I think this was I think much more to do with capping the investment and having a credible story for the marketplace around that, as opposed to just kind of carrying on blithely and regardless. So to a large extent, I think it's a retrenchment. And it'll be interesting to see whether other newspaper groups follow. Banks have to learn to lend again. There's, a lack of available credit doesn't strangle things when they start off with, but it does strangle them after about a year. And unless people are lucky enough to know high net worth individuals, how do you grow your business? I would not have been able to build this business. We would not have been able to build this business if we'd been relying on banks the last 3 years. It would never have happened. We'd have had to jump through too many hoops. So I think banks absolutely have to learn to take risk and to lend again.